Go.
Hi, I'm Missy, and today we're going to be exploring Lower Manhattan, New York, the greatest city in the world. So for the next 2 hours, we are going to explore some of the stories that made us one of the greatest cities in the world. We are going to have a colorful cast of characters. We're going to explore everything from the Manhattan Purchase to George Washington's inauguration as the first president to the terror attacks on 9/11. We're going to start right here at Bowling Green Park, where the city began nearly 400 years ago. And we're going to travel around, finally ending up at City Hall, where the modern era began. Louder. Now, if we're going to explore New York City's past, we should probably talk a little bit about the city today. New York City today has a population of 8.2 million people, and it's spread out over 5 boroughs. Those boroughs are Staten Island over there to the south, Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, and of course, the one we're in right now, Manhattan. If New York City were its own country, it would be the 15th largest economy in the world with a GDP of $1.28 trillion. Now you might be thinking to yourself, why? Why this city? Why this area? Well, if you've ever dealt in real estate, you know one of the most important things. Location, location, location. To the south, we have one of the world's best natural harbors. To the east, we have the Atlantic Ocean, and on the other side of that, of course, Europe and Africa. To the north, we have the Hudson River, which takes us up to rich hunting grounds, and then to the west, an entire continent full of natural resources. So right here, we are standing in the oldest part of New York City. The Dutch built a fortress right there. We have the first public park, Bowling Green, right there. And over here, the intention for the first White House. It would have had the address number 1 Broadway, so what does that mean? Yes, this is Broadway, New York's longest, most famous street. Now, it runs the entire way up the city. Broadway, believe it or not, is older than the United States, older than the English colony, older than the Dutch colony. It dates back all the way to the original inhabitants of the island, the Lenape. Now, it's very appropriate that we talk about the Lenape as we're standing in front of the National Museum of the American Indian. Some of you who are movie buffs may also recognize this as the Manhattan Museum of Art from the movie Ghostbusters 2. That's right, that evil river of slime that was powered by all of the anger of those 8.2 million New Yorkers fueled that. But hopefully, in the next 2 hours, myself, some of the stories you hear, and the other New Yorkers we'll run into will negate that opinion that we New Yorkers can be very negative. And there'll be many stories to show that in times of need, we all stick together and make the city what it is today. So, let's start here. The building behind me is actually the 4th building to be located on this site. As I said earlier, originally it was a Dutch fortress. It was your standard 4-point star fortress built by the Dutch. After the Revolutionary War, the English, the government took over that building, ripped it down, and built an elegant brick building that was intended to be the first White House. As you may know, the capital, of course, did not stay in New York City, so that house was used by the New York governors. When the government moved out, that building was torn down, and up sprung an affluent neighborhood. This block was filled with upper middle class homes. There's actually one that still remains, and we'll see it later on in the tour on the other side of the block. Well, once the wealthy started to move uptown, the steamship offices moved in and made that their home. Lower Broadway became known as Steamship Row because it was a very busy port at that point. Finally, the government acquired the site again in 1890, and they held a competition for the new customs house. Cass Gilbert won that competition, and in 1907, this beautiful building behind me was finished in the Beaux Arts style. Now, Cass Gilbert also designed the Woolworth building, which we'll see later on in the tour. Some of you, when we walk around, may be able to catch a glimpse of it up Broadway. As I said, this was intended to be the U.S. Customs House. So there are many nautical themes on the building. We're going to start off with a few. The 4 statues behind me represent the continents of Asia, America, Europe, and Africa. They were designed by Daniel Chester French, who is also famous for designing the Lincoln Monument in Washington. Now remember, they were made in the early 20th century, so they do have somewhat of a racial twist to them. We have Asia over here, it's spiritual and corrupt. You'll notice the peaceful sleeping tiger is supposed to represent how religion has power even over the most wild creatures. Then we have a false idol and a cross. Alright, next we have America, young and vigorous at the time, of course. You can see the stalk of corn that represents prosperity, and the torch that represents liberty and freedom. And speaking of that racial twist, we have the Native American and the Aztec god, which represents the past. Next we have Europe, old and wise. We have the globe that represents wisdom, and then there's an old lady in the back, which we can look at, you can see kind of from the side. She represents history. Finally, we have Africa, sleeping and mysterious. At the time that this was built, Africa was known as the Dark Continent, as it was very much unknown. Also, if you see up at the top, we have some faces that represent the races of the world. Now, the statues on top of the cornice represent the great seafaring nations. And starting from right to left, go through them quickly, we have Greece, Rome, Phoenicia, Genoa. You guys might be having a problem with the sun seeing them. Genoa, Spain, Holland, Portugal, Denmark, Germany, France, and England. And then up at the very top, we have Mercury, the god of commerce. So there you go.